My name is Jerry Oy. I'm Applications Specialist at Applied Engineering. And I will be going over automating engineering designs with iLogic. Roughly have probably about 45 minutes. I'll go through just a few slides. I'm not a slide person, so hopefully you guys will appreciate me just diving right into the Inventor software after just showing you a few slides here. One thing I want to just hit on is obviously we have Applied Day today and tomorrow, so just kind of take note of some of the different times that we have some events going on. Just to hit on a few here, obviously after this one, there's a Vault 2021, What's New? So Eric Miller will be doing that one. Some other ones as far as tomorrow, there's a AutoCAD electrical one for those of you that may be using AutoCAD electrical, some what's new stuff there. And then 10 o'clock tomorrow, I will also be doing the What's New Inventor 2021. And then another one there you can see at 1 o'clock tomorrow is a FEA kind of a best practices overview. So if you have the time, I highly recommend attending some of those different webinars that we have today and tomorrow. All right, so applied engineering, how do we fit in your guys's daily life, I guess? So as far as technology, we have training, implementation, and support. So as far as the training goes, we do Vault training. Eric Miller is our Vault trainer. I do AutoCAD training. We have another person that does the AutoCAD electrical training. I do also just the plain old AutoCAD training. And then implementation, say you guys have purchased some software from us and you want to set up your templates, or you want a Vault system implemented into your company, Eric Miller would come in and get that Vault system up and running for you. And then we also have support, so we have first team support. If you guys ever have any technical issues, you can certainly call us up over the phone and have one-on-one support with us. And, you know, obviously we do our best to answer the issues that you may have right away. If not, we get back to you in an extremely timely manner and get your issues resolved. Some services, design and manufacturing engineering. So obviously, if you guys don't have the resources within your company to stay ahead of your projects, you can certainly hire one of our engineers or designers to come in and essentially be a consultant. And you know, whether it's Inventor software, AutoCAD, whatever kind of flavor of CAD software it may be, we can come in and help you out and help you stay ahead on your projects. Software development, we have software developers directly. I think most of them are in our Fargo office. So we have different developers that could develop software for whatever type of software I guess you guys are looking at getting created for you. And then our reprographics department in the Fargo office. So you can come in and get big plots printed out of, you know, if you're an architectural company or a civil company, whatever it may be, just stop in and one of our guys or gals can assist you with getting your plots printed out. All right, so specifically to iLogic, what we're going to be going over today, just a few topics that I'll be covering. Preparing to add your parameters. So obviously with iLogic, for those of you that don't know, iLogic comes with your software, right? And it allows you to essentially, whether it's parts or assemblies or drawings, it allows you to take those files and basically make them more intelligent files. So you can set if then, what if type of statements, and just by opening up a user form, you can drop down maybe a multi-value menu and make some different selections, and depending on what those selections are in your user form, you can have your assembly or your drawing or your part update on the fly. So basically it's one step further than if you guys or gals ever use iParts or iAssemblies. You know, essentially those do have a little bit of intelligence in them, in the fact that you can make a selection in your model tree and see an assembly update to a different style of design. But with your iAssemblies or iParts, all that's really doing is suppressing out components or unsuppressing components, maybe changing the color of your components and then so on. But with iLogic, you have that form, make a change in your multi-user list or whatever it may be, and then lo and behold, your assemblies or whatever file type it is will update with what changes you want. So some of the different types of parameters you can have in your iLogic files is Boolean operations. So Boolean operations is true and false parameters. You can create multi-value parameters, rules for the suppression of your either features, or it could also be components. And then if you have some various dimensions that you want to update on the fly while you're changing your user form, you can certainly do that. All right, so what I'm going to be focusing on today is just some components and that assembly of that screwdriver. So the way that this assembly is set up is I have a handful of different components, and I want to be able to go into that form, and I'll show you how to basically create that form and adjust that form to your liking. But I want to be able to replace out some of those bits in that screwdriver. Maybe I just want to set it up as being a standard driver type, so it's not a multi-bit style of screwdriver. And then depending on what driver type I select, it will update my assembly and show me one of the various multi-bits. And then obviously you can see that there's a cap on there, so that cap is going to show up. If I have it set to a standard, obviously the cap is going to get removed, and the 4 different bits will get suppressed, right? And then all that I would have is just that flat blade on that flathead screwdriver, okay? All right, so whoops, let's go back a little bit. All right, so I'm just gonna bring up my Inventor application here. Well, one thing you can see, so I highly recommend tomorrow, if you guys have time, hop in on my 10 o'clock Inventor What's New with 2021. My assumption is that most of you probably has already installed Inventor 2021, or you went on maybe some YouTube videos or something. So you will see that one of the drastic changes with the new release is essentially the black theme. Right now, the background right here I have set to white, but when you first install 2021, you will have a black background. You can see the tree itself, the model tree is black, ribbon panel is black, and so on. This is in pre-release right now, so it's not necessarily fully released. If I go to the Home tab here, this is still white. This has not changed yet, so that's one of the factors on why it's in pre-release right now. But my assumption is in one of the next service packs, or not necessarily hotfix, but one of the next service packs, it might be fully released still this year. If not, for sure it'll be released next year. All right, so this is that screwdriver assembly, right? If I kind of hover over this, you can see that right now it's set to being a multi-style of screwdriver. You got the head, you got the body, and you have one various style of bit, right? So within the iLogic software, one of the most important things before you start developing the intelligence within your assembly or whatever file type may be, we're working in assembly, so I'm going to keep saying assembly. One of the most important things is in your level of detail, make sure that you've created something other than master, because you're going to be suppressing out components. Inventor will wig out, not allowing you to suppress components, because you need to create a custom level of detail. So I'm just verifying that I have a custom level of detail created right now. And then let's just go into here, and I'll go to my iLogic tab, And then you have a tab called Forms, and I named my form configurator. So here's that configurator, and if I just want to kind of test things a little bit, let's just go into the color, let's say, and just start changing the color. So I have already set some various rules. The tab right next to form is rules, so I've created multiple different rules to do all these different changes here. So let's zoom in a little bit, let's say on that bit, okay, and just go in and just start changing it. So this particular multi-value drop-down list, I have a rule actually set up that it doesn't actually suppress that component. One of the new features with, it was either 2019 or 2020, is the fact that you can now replace all components as well as add or remove constraints to those components. So that's what's going on right now is I'm literally removing components in there. So you can see in my model tree, screwdriver body, I have a cap and I have a bit. I only have 3 components in there. Well, in that PowerPoint, you saw that I actually had 4 bits in there, right? Plus in this drop-down menu, there's 4 bits there, okay? So every time I change it, you don't really see anything happening in the model tree, but what I've done, another thing with iLogic is I stabilize names. So I've made it so that these names do not ever change because in your rules, the name of your components have to stay the same or else, again, there's going to be some sort of error within your rule editor, not allowing you to make various changes. All right, so I made some changes to the bits, changed the color there. Let's maybe zoom out a little bit here, and maybe I don't want it to be a multi-bit style of screwdriver. Let's just do standard. All right, so now what just happened, now here I did actually suppress that 1 bit, and then obviously the head of that screwdriver. This is just nothing more than just a standard flathead screwdriver, okay? So let's kind of dive in a little bit on how did I go about making those various rules. So I'm gonna actually go, let's go into the, let's go and bring up the rule again. I'm gonna go back to that multi-bit. That way I have those components unsuppressed in my model tree. All right, so let's go into the part file of the actual body here, okay? So before I even started creating any rules within my assembly environment, I actually went into all the various components and I prepped those components to allow me to make changes at the assembly level, okay? So manage tab and then bring up the parameters dialog box. So one thing I do recommend, I'm not saying it should be that way, but a recommendation is if you are going to be creating some iLogic rules within your designs, basically the best thing to do is just create all your needed parameters as user parameters. Kind of stay away from changing your model parameters, leave them their default D values. But obviously, if you're going to use a certain parameter, make a user parameter and have the model parameter be tied to that user parameter, okay? And then obviously give your parameter a specific name. If I see something that says D81 or D82, D83, and so on, I'm not going to know what that parameter is tied to, okay? So in this body, I created 3 user parameters. Obviously, I have body color. And as far as creating multi-value parameters, so all 3 of these are text parameters. You can get that just by going to this drop-down menu and clicking on Add Text, okay? And then from there, you can right-click, really I believe in any one of these cells here, and get that Edit Multi-Value List or Create Multi-Value List. I already have a list, so it just says Edit Multi-Value List, all right? And this is how you go about creating multi-values as user parameters. So I just added a handful of different colors that I want for that body. And I did the same thing for the cap too. So some of the same properties here. Type, right click, edit multi-value. And this is how I got multi-bit and standard. If I click on that, I can do delete, come up here and just do the same thing so that my assembly rule doesn't error out. So this is how you go about adding any of your multi-values, okay? All right, so body color, type, and size. So let's zoom out a little bit here. I want this screwdriver, the body itself, to either get longer or get shorter, depending on which multi-value I select. All right, so there's standard, and I have stubby. This takes a little bit, and there you go, okay? So that's how I prepped it. I created some user parameters in my piece part, and then from there, in the assembly, I can tie those values together. Let's go into the cap and see what other changes I had. So you can see that the actual cap is green right now, but the assembly, the user form in the assembly drives the color of the cap at the assembly level. It doesn't necessarily drive it at the part level here, but I can certainly, if I go into manage and parameters, scroll all the way down, and all I really have for this cap, I'm not changing the cap in any way, shape, or form, so just the color. So I could go into, say, the blue color, and it changes it to that actual color, okay? So cap itself, easy parameter, just a user parameter for the color. And then let's go and click on open. And in my project folder, I'm gonna scroll down here and you can see here's all my different bits. So it's not like it's an iPart or anything like that. They're just actual different .ipt files, right? And as I mentioned, I am replacing out those components at the bit level. So directly in the piece part of the different bits, I don't have any rules whatsoever. So let's kind of dive into the rules at the assembly level here. One of the first ones, so as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I have my assembly file set up so that when I open it, Inventor automatically runs that particular rule, LOD, that means the level of detail, and it assures me that I have something other than my master active. You always have to have this active if you are going to be suppressing out components in your designs, okay? So, I could certainly just click on one and just say activate. I don't have to click on activate because it's already activated, but I could manually do that. I don't want to have to do that. So I just created this simple LOD rule here. Let me just drag over the rule, and that is all it is. And one thing to make note on, this is kind of a side note here for everyone. Not sure how much of you know iLogic as far as extensively or not, but these are what's called snippets. So you don't have to be a programmer to use iLogic or make use of creating intelligent models through the development of iLogic. But these snippets just kind of help you kind of get started, right? So actually what I had done is I went online to Google and I just typed a rule for activating a certain level of detail, right? And this is a rule that I found, and I just copied it and I pasted it in here, and lo and behold, that's what activates my level of detail. So either go online, make use of Google or whatever application you want to use, and you can find a lot of users have already taken the time out of finding a rule that works for a certain function that you want, right? But there's a whole bunch of other snippets that you can kind of scroll over, and you can see essentially what those different snippets do for you. You can change a part number on your project tab. So that's what that means, is you can go to your project tab of your iProperties and add a part number, or even change a part number. Obviously, you have an iProperty for your description. So you can go to your project tab, description field, and you want a description to be something for this particular assembly file, okay? So a whole bunch of different snippets there. All right, so this one here, this is the one that when I go into my form in my assembly file, or the size of the body, the color of both the head and the body, and the cap, the color for the cap and the color for the body, and also the size of my screwdriver body. This is what dives down into each component at the IPT level. And in the case of the body, it would change the size of the body. And the next line down, this particular snippet changes the color of it, okay? So that particular snippet, let's go into this one right here. This one would be the one at the assembly level. So it's just saying, go into my screwdriver body, find the user parameter that you have that's called out as body color, and then obviously change that color to whatever color I specified. Looking up at the top in your quick access toolbar, there's that second drop-down menu, that's your color of your components. That's what I'm changing by that very last field there for color, okay? So I named this particular parameter link parameters. This is one thing too I highly recommend for those of you that use iLogic. If somebody else is going to open up your designs that has iLogic built into it, add some sort of comments above your line of code that explains to that user that has your file opened, what is that rule actually doing for you? So all this is doing is linking the parameters between the part level and assembly level, okay? I'll just go into the color one. That was a different one. I already have that built into my link parameter one. So let's go into bit type. Okay, so this particular rule is one of the more lengthy ones. So as I mentioned earlier, either 2019 or 2020, Inventor came out with the ability to add or remove components entirely from your model tree, along with constraints. So let's go into my snippets here. All right, so this particular one, you see that there's one called Components Classic. So a lot of these snippets have been around for some time now, many versions ago of the Inventor software. And then right below it, now there's one called iLogic Assemblies and Components. So this is the various snippets that I use to develop this particular rule, adding my components and adding my various constraints. If I scroll down a little bit for the constraints, here's Relationships Classic. So they just have it set as classic because these are snippets that have been around again for quite some time. Right below that, these are the ones that were added along with your adding of your components here, okay? So if you look in here, you can add angular constraints, flush constraints, insert and mates, and so on, okay? There's some tangent constraints. I go up and go back to here. So just for an example here, I'm just going to create some spacing here. So you can see that as far as my add components here, I'm gonna come up here to this add components one and just double click on it. And then it slaps in a start for the code that I want. So all I need to do, this particular field, all that is nothing more than you need to give this particular rule essentially a name, component A, right? So you can't have duplicate names within your rule. If I have a very lengthy rule in here, you can't have duplicate names. So obviously I have component A here, so this one here, if this was to add a entirely different component, make sure you just rename it. And it could be pretty much whatever name you want it to be, right? All right, so, and then this field right here, this one is going into your model tree, finding a certain name. So I could come up here and click on screwdriver bit, and let's click on name, and just double click screwdriver bit here, right? Adds that screwdriver bit in there. And then the very next field is which actual part do I want to bring in to replace this one? So, kind of take note in my model tree here, with the exception of the body, the cap and the bit, I don't have a :1. So the colon just represents what instance of that is in my model tree. If I had 5 instances of the body, there'd be :1 through :5, right? But I stabilize these other 2 names so that those names don't change, right? So yeah, again, this very second field is what new component do I want to bring in? So I would have to know what that component is, and then I can just type it out there. As you may already know, if you guys create the different rules and stuff in the code, everything's case sensitive. You know, if you don't have a space in your name of your component, make sure you don't have a space in the name within your rule here, and so on. Some of these other fields you don't really have to worry about too much. Grounding, you know, do you want to ground it? Do you want to actually fix it? So that very first component, you can see there's that thumbtack there. All that represents is that it's grounded. So obviously, in most cases, when you're adding components, you will leave that set to false. Okay. You want your component to be visible or invisible, and so on. You can change the appearance of your components. Okay. So that's what I did to develop my rule here. Is I went into my snippets and I clicked on Add Component for the bit, and I was able to change that starting point of my rule there that I had in there. And I just, you know, brought in my correct name, brought in the correct name of which ones is going to be brought in. And then, as I mentioned, everything else you can essentially just leave, okay? And then the other one for snippets is coming down to constraints, this particular collection of constraints. So looks like all three of these are mates, okay? So I would come down and I would do this one here, add mate constraints. Kind of take note that there are some constraints you can add for iMates. And I'm not going to get into iMates in this webinar, but iMates are just intelligent mates that are in your components. So if you're bringing in a component into your assembly, instead of you manually applying a specific type of mate, you can have Inventor automatically apply that mate as you're bringing it into your assembly, and right away that component will be mated to whatever reference it's attached to, okay? So anyway, this add mate constraints, this is what I used to develop these three mates. Most of you know that for any given component, you need 3 constraints to fully define it. As far as degrees of freedom, you always have 3 translational, 3 rotational degrees of freedom, okay? So by adding those 3 different constraints, I have fully defined, in this case, my screwdriver bit. The rotation, it's not going to rotate in there because, as you know, the kind of the shaft of the screwdriver has a kind of a octagon or hexagon shape, so it's not going to rotate. So I applied some constraints in here. Specifically, I added there's a work point in my body, and then there's also a center point that I'm utilizing in my bit. So that mate constraint is just attaching my work point 2 of the body to the center point of my bit. Take a look at one more mate. I'm not going to dive too deep into this, but there's a YZ plane that is in my screwdriver body component, and there's also a YZ plane that is in my screwdriver bit component. And I'm just creating a mate on those 2 planes. It's no different than if any of you are doing these mate constraints manually, okay? All right, so because I'm adding a component right here, I also need to delete out the other 3 bits that I'm not using. So as you saw in that PowerPoint, I had 4 bits. I had a Robertson, torque small, torque standard, and a flat bit. So if I'm using a flat bit, if I'm bringing that one in, I need to delete the other ones. So all it is repetition. I highly recommend, if you're creating your rules, take advantage of your Control-C, Control-V, Control-Copy, Control-Paste, or even Control-X for cut, okay? Utilize those functions to just copy and paste, and that's all that I did down here. I copied all of these lines of code, and I copied them down 3 additional times, and then I just changed some of the different names in here, depending on which component I want to bring in. So scrolling up, what type do I want to bring in? I want to bring in a flat, right? Come down to the next line of code. So here's my if and else if type of statements. I want to bring in a Robertson, okay? So there's my stabilized name. You can see the names are the same, and you can see that in the model tree there. And then I have that line of code that brings in that Robertson bit, whereas on top, I'm bringing in a flat bit right there, okay? And I have the exact same constraints in my Robertson bit as I do in my flat bit. And that goes the same with all the other bits, torque small, torque standard, and so on. So I'm just Control C and Control V, copying and pasting the various lines of code from the very first group, from the flat one, and then I'm changing some of the different names here. Okay. So this is the most lengthy rule that I have in this assembly. And then let's go into the driver type. So again, I have a description. It just changes the driver type, whether it's multi-bit or standard bit. So if my driver type, so this is a user parameter that I created at my assembly level, and you already saw that when I went into my multi-value editor, all I had was a multi-bit and I had a standard bit. Okay. So if it's set to multi-bit, then I want to do some things. What I want to do, I want to unsuppress some components. Obviously, I need to unsuppress the cap, and I want to have one of the bits be unsuppressed. So this particular line is just unsuppressing my stabilized screwdriver bit name. Okay. And then I have some constraints that I'm turning on versus having them suppressed. And then obviously if I have it set to standard, I don't need a cap and I don't need the bit, it's just a flathead screwdriver, then I'm suppressing out those constraints. Okay. All right, just a couple more here. All right, so here's actually one. I don't have it in my form right now, but I'll show you how to add it to the form. Let's scroll this off a little bit. Actually, I should be able to rotate this over. And okay, so this is a multi-bit. So it's kind of hard to see because I don't have my edges displayed right now, but there's a cap right here. And maybe I have some bits that are kind of longer, right? So inside the hollow portion of that head, I need to have a taller cap. So that's all this rule is doing is, let's move this up a little bit. I have a standard long and extra long caps. So it's just going to replace out the cap with the correct style of cap. Okay. So if I want to add that to my form, I can just go into my form, right click on that button and just say edit. So there is the form editor, and then you have what your actual form looks like. So if I look over into my parameters here, I have screwdriver cap, and you can see obviously I don't have it added in here yet, so I can just grab it and just drag and drop. Okay. So now from here I can close out of that editor, bring up just my form itself, and you can resize it if you need to. So there's that screwdriver cap, standard long, extra long, so going to long, and might help actually if I show my edges a little bit, just like so. There's extra long, long, and obviously you have standard. So, all right, here's another one, last one, cap rotation. So this particular rule, all this is doing is nothing more than, I'm just saying, hey, if I want to kind of mimic the ability to just maybe unscrew or screw on that cap, all this is doing is just suppressing or unsuppressing the constraint that locks my rotation of it. Okay. So again, if I went into my form, right click and edit, I could then come over to my parameters, find the one that says cap rotation. That's just a user parameter that I created at the assembly level, drag and drop. I don't need this form editor box open anymore. I just need my form itself. And if I grab that, I cannot rotate it as of right now, right? So let's click on false. Oops, let's close out of this actually. All right, so I have it set to false. I needed that form closed actually in order to try to rotate it. So right now it's fully defined, degrees of freedom. Cap rotation, do I wanna have the ability to rotate it? True, okay. So let's grab that, and now I'm just able to rotate that cap. All right, let's see. Just gonna bring up the parameters dialog box. So I kind of touched on the different types of user parameters that you can add. As I mentioned, make sure that if you guys are creating iLogic rules, change the names. If you are by chance utilizing the model parameter names, change those names to something descriptive. As I mentioned though, I would recommend adding all of the parameters as user parameters. Any of the parameters that are going to be placed in your form, so all of these parameters, make sure these parameters are your user parameters and just leave your model parameters the default names. I'm not saying you can't change them. I'm just recommending utilizing the user parameters that you can create. You can create every single type of user parameter as you have model parameters, which obviously all your model parameters are essentially numeric style parameters. So if I click on add numeric, that's how you can go about adding a numeric parameter. All of your parameters cannot have spaces in them. So just make sure. Some people, as far as creating user parameters, I myself, generally what I do is I just place an underscore in between my different words rather than have the space, because like I said, you cannot have a space. Another thing that some people do is, let's change this one a little bit. So some people actually have a user parameter where the very first character is uppercase, and then for the second word, the second word's first character is uppercase. So obviously I have that multi for the M, and then for the bit I have the B there, right? So I'm not saying there's any right or wrong way of creating the user parameters, but I find myself doing those underscores a lot more so than just simply having uppercases for the very first character of each first and second word. Okay. All right, so some of the Boolean operations, true and false. So click your filter here and you can go into add true and false. Okay. So one of the true and false ones, and actually I'm gonna multi-bit. All right, so this particular Boolean field, I am not actually using this right now in my form, and I know that because I had created this a few days back. So one way that you can make use of your Boolean or your true and false type of statements is if I am in my form and I set my screwdriver in this case to being a standard, I don't want that field for replacing all my bits, the Torx and Robertson and flat and stuff. I don't want that field to be selectable. I want it to be grayed out. So by creating this true and false one, and obviously my only selections are true and false, I'm going to utilize that. I'm going to just come into my form and just say edit. Okay. So let's actually test this first before I actually show you what happens here. Let's go into driver type here. Let's go into standard. So actually, I actually have it already set. So notice that my bit type, it's grayed out right now. I can't select it. And this is the way it should be. You shouldn't be able to select this if your driver type is set to standard, right? Go to multi-bit. Now it is selectable, and I'm able to select to a different style of bit, right? So let's dive into the actual form editor and see how that happened. So that true and false one of my multi-bit, right? That's the multi-bit, that's true and false. If you find the particular field that you want to either gray out or have be editable or selectable, this is the one, bit type in this case, right? So if I have bit type selected, down here, this properties panel, you can scroll down and there's this enabling parameter name. If I click here and then click my drop down, so it shows me cap rotation and multi-bit. Remember that I showed you that true and false one where do I want to be able to rotate that cap or do I want that cap to be fixed? So that's the one that the cap rotation is. But in this case, multi-bit, I just want to use that true and false operation to either gray or have my field be editable for the bit type. So that's why you have that set to multi-bit. Now, if I had that set to none, let's do that. And this is actually the way it was before I even created that true and false for the multi-bit. let's bring this up and see how this reacts now when I change my driver type. So let's go to standard, right? Well, right now I still have the ability to change my bit, and as far as I'm concerned, I shouldn't have that ability because my bit does not exist, but you can certainly come in here. Let's just see what happens. Now I get an error, and the reason that I get that error is because the actual component doesn't exist right now. It's trying to bring up that bit, but it's obviously not supposed to be there. So I will get that error every single time. Now, if I go back to multi-bit, and now let's try to scroll through these. Now there is no errors, right? Okay, so again, iLogic, click on the configurator. Whoops, sorry. Right click on the configurator and hit edit. And find the one that you want to have be editable or non-editable, which is the bit type. And just simply scroll down, find enabling parameter name, click on that guy, and find the correct true and false one, which is the multi-bit. Okay, and then just test it out. Driver type, standard, now grayscale, right? Multi-bit, now it's editable. Screwdriver size, I don't think I showed this yet as far as actually making that change. Zoom out a little bit. W1 showed you the bits. As far as color, there's orange one, red, and so on. Screwdriver type, cap rotation. All right, so I'm going to go to the panel and just see if there's any questions here. Let's take a look here. Emily, have you been looking at the question panel?
Yep, there was one early on about some audio issues, but other than that, I haven't seen any.
Okay. All right. So as far as the iLogic material, that was all that I was going to cover. So we can leave this panel opened up for a little bit, and both myself and Emily will monitor any questions that any of you have. Again, I do appreciate everyone for taking the time today to attend the webinar. Besides Emily and myself, in most cases, obviously we're in kind of some difficult times right now, but a lot of times we do have more people on these different webinars that we're having today and tomorrow, but this is kind of an informal webinar sessions both today and tomorrow. So I appreciate you guys for being on the webinar, and hopefully you got a little bit out of this very first webinar for Applied Day today.